Don't focus on what a player cannot do. Focus on what he can do and how we can use it. That is the famous and all-encompassing scouting philosophy of the most dominant franchise in professional sports, the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick has made a dynasty out of his ability to find players with very narrow skill sets that nobody else wants and maximizing those narrow skill sets as much as possible. Whether it's converting a quarterback into a receiver, or converting a receiver into a running back, or rescuing the career of a seemingly failed linebacker that could never quite fit in, the Patriots are masters of figuring out what a player can do and never relying on him for something he can't. And it's with that philosophy in mind that I approach my evaluation of one of the most polarizing prospects of this entire draft class, Ole Miss wide receiver DK Metcalf. Considering his downright viral combine performance, you've probably already heard his name and the ridiculous numbers attached to it. 6'3", 230 pounds, 4.3 40-yard dash, 40-inch vertical, 27 reps on the bench. All of it is absolutely insane, and arguably beyond any receiver we've seen enter the league since Julio almost a decade ago. But there was also another number thrown around that got almost as much attention as the rest of them combined: 7.38. That was Metcalf's legendarily bad time in the three-cone drill, which would have been a poor number even for the likes of Tom Brady, let alone someone trying to become a first-round pick at wide receiver. And after that number went viral by itself, Metcalf's viability as a prospect somehow disappeared overnight, or at least that's what some folks on Twitter would have you believe. However, as I watch Metcalf's draft stock fluctuate wildly over a 24-hour period just based on numbers and hot takes, I couldn't help but wonder, had anyone actually watched him play? And I mean really watched him. Not just look at highlights or videos of drills, but did they actually pay attention to his unique skill set and the value that it brings? Because when I truly dug into Metcalf's tape to assess what he could do, and obviously also what he could not do, to me that three-cone time didn't really change my perception of him as a player. When you look at a guy like DK, he does a select few things at an elite level, but all of them are very valuable. He can accelerate and separate himself on vertical routes, he can out-jump people on 50-50 balls, and he can use his strength to dominate body position on in-breaking routes. Does he have pretty bad lateral quickness, and is he likely not going to be great at running double moves or laterally intensive routes like pivots and post corners? Yeah, of course, and his three-cone time indicated that rather plainly. But even with that in consideration, when he's already so damn good at everything else, why should I care that he can't run a pivot route? I'm not drafting him to run a pivot route. I'm drafting him to run the things that actually fit his skill set. Goes, posts, slants, and curls. Those are the only four routes that matter for a guy like Metcalf with his size, speed, and physicality. And as long as he continues to master those four routes, he doesn't need to run anything else. There are Pro Bowl and All-Pro caliber receivers that are just as big, fast, and laterally challenged as Metcalf who have made their careers off of those four routes, including names like Calvin Johnson, Demaryius Thomas, and Josh Gordon. In fact, when you look at the route tree percentage for Megatron from back before he retired, nearly 75% of all the routes he ran were either goes, posts, slants, or curls, and he was one of the most dominant players at the position in the history of the league. Johnson didn't even run a three-cone at the combine or at his pro day, probably because the time would have been not very good because of how he was built, but he never really needed elite lateral quickness to make those four routes in his tree work. Goes, posts, and slants are all about sheer explosiveness and body positioning more than they are about sharpness in a cut. Your main goal is just to cross the face of a defender with one big explosive step and put your frame in between them and the ball. If you've got good straight line speed like Johnson and Metcalf obviously do, you can use that to your advantage to separate on the route over the middle. You don't have to drop your hips into and out of a break, you don't have to throw in any crafty double moves or fancy footwork. It's all about size, speed, positioning, and timing, and all of those are things that Metcalf can do at an elite level. I don't care that he can't reliably get me 8 yards on a pivot route when he could easily get me 20 yards on a slant instead. Winning football games is all about using unique skill sets to your advantage within a system, and Metcalf has a very unique skill set that fits a lot of systems. As a prototypical X receiver, he is extremely adept at using his size and strength to defeat jams at the line, and then using his rare explosiveness to get downfield and win on deep balls, which in itself creates a huge dilemma in the secondary. He's too big to press, and obviously too fast to run with, so defenses are forced to give him monstrous cushions with their corners to prevent themselves from getting beat over the top, which then ironically opens up opportunities for free yardage underneath with hitches and slants. It's a little bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario because of how gifted Metcalf is, and it kind of reminds me of how defenses have treated Tyreek Hill since he first came into the league. Just like with Metcalf, they'll be aggressive in press coverage and he'll burn them over the top, and then they'll be conservative in coverage and he'll burn them with yards after catch underneath. And it almost feels like one way or another, whether it's 50 yards down the field or 5, the only thing that guys like Hill and Metcalf need to make a big play is just the right number of opportunities to do so. But therein lies the rub, because if their quarterback or their coaches are not making a concerted effort to give them a chance on deep balls or to manufacture touches underneath, their stat lines will without a doubt look terrible. That's just kind of the nature of the beast for them, and unfortunately for Metcalf, it's also probably the other main argument against drafting him. He did not get a lot of targets and he did not have a lot of production, and most people look at his numbers and often wonder why he never cracked 700 yards in a season, or why other receivers on his own team outperformed him statistically. Was it all his fault, and was he just a bad player that was propped up by highlights and athletic testing, or was there something else to blame? To me, after charting 5 of his 7 games this season, it's sort of a mix of both. The one thing you can really criticize Metcalf for are his drops. He loses concentration far too often, he'll take his eyes off the ball too early while jumping or setting up a move after the catch, and the ball will either go right through or bounce off his hands as a result. We know he can catch and pull in some truly spectacular one-handers while he's at it, but the concentration drops were a real, legitimate problem, and he's gonna have to fix those once he's in the league, kinda like how Mike Evans already had to fix them earlier in his career. But a few drops here and there were not the sole cause of his lack of production like some people would have you believe, and it would be disingenuous of anyone to pretend they were, because truth be told, the entire situation around Metcalf was not built for him to succeed. Let's talk about the quarterback problem for starters. Jordan Ta'amu was a highly inconsistent passer that struggled with ball placement, took a lot of unnecessary and preventable sacks, and who locked in on his first read way too often and threw some truly horrific interceptions as a result. For every beautiful dime deep down the field for a touchdown, there was an equally frustrating missed opportunity for another Metcalf score where Ta'amu failed to place the pass correctly, or he held onto the ball too long and took a sack, or worse, he threw a pick. I couldn't count how many times I muttered to myself while watching these games, DK's open, Baker would have thrown that, or Garoppolo, or Newton, or Stafford, or any other number of competent NFL quarterbacks that would have gotten him the ball for a big play. It was extremely frustrating to watch because there was so much potential yardage and so many points left on the table week after week, but believe it or not, even the failures of the quarterback situation paled in comparison to the failures of the Ole Miss system itself. Offensive coordinator Phil Longo had Metcalf running a grand total of 2 routes on virtually all of his snaps: go and curl. There were almost no post routes to speak of, no slants, and even very few screen passes, despite the fact that Metcalf was a fantastically effective receiver on screens. For whatever reason, despite the fact that Metcalf had the skill set to be a monster on slants, posts, and any in-breaking route that would let him cross the face of a defender with his size and speed, Longo pretty much never let him run those routes over the middle. Hell, we never saw him run any deep dig routes at all until the Combine, and he looked awesome getting in and out of those breaks for being such a big, thick wideout. It just makes no sense to me why someone who very obviously has the skill set for it, and who demonstrated that multiple times, was not allowed to contribute to his football team in that way. There was a play against Texas Tech in the very first week of the season that I think was a microcosm of Metcalf's whole year under Longo's play calling, and it's the one play I keep going back to every time I see someone doubt his ability to run that Calvin Johnson-esque route tree. It's about halfway through the first quarter on 1st and 10, and I want you to pay attention to how Metcalf releases on this slant route. It's one of maybe 4 or 5 total slants I charted him running across 5 complete games, but it's a good indicator that he actually can run this route very effectively. Off the snap, DK gives a hard jab step to the outside, which naturally backs the corner off a little bit because the last thing he wants to do is miss a jam and get beat down the boundary, but the purpose of that jab step outside is to then set up a release back inside once that corner backs off. Now, because that DB wants no part of jamming Metcalf at the line, DK is free to do basically whatever he wants to do on this release with absolutely no impediments or limitations. And with all that freedom, he can use his sheer explosiveness to immediately put himself in position for an inside break. He He's widened out away from the corner so he can't get a hand on him to feel the route in coverage, and the corner's also scrambling to try to get as deep as possible, as fast as possible, because he knows that DK has legit 4.3 speed. So with this point in the route, Metcalf is in complete control, and the defender is pretty much just along for the ride. From there, Metcalf rolls his hips inside on the slant, and again, because of his size and speed and the lack of contact from the corner, he has easy separation and is in perfect position for a huge catch and run if he were targeted. And what's important about this is that this kind of easy separation on a slant is exactly what made Calvin Johnson so productive. This cut is not sharp, it's not relying on stopping and starting quickly, it's not relying on any sort of skill set really that Metcalf does not already possess, and that's perfectly okay. For bigger receivers, slants are all about preserving and redirecting momentum, not stopping it. And the same goes for posts and over routes as well. And these are the kinds of routes where DK can truly shine and rip off big gains just like Megatron used to. He was not targeted on this play because Ole Miss refused to design any sort of plays for Metcalf to make something happen on slants, but this one play shows that he can do it and he can get open very easily on that concept. He's not just a go route machine, he's not just a screen and yak monster, and he's not just a one-trick pony. He can run that modified route tree that emphasizes minimal deceleration and maximum speed, and as long as he goes to a team that understands that and builds their offense around that like the Lions, Broncos, and Browns used to do, DK can be just as productive as any of the superstars that laid that blueprint. He can beat up press coverage, he can stretch the field vertically, he can be a red zone weapon, he can move the chains on slants and manipulate safeties in the post, he can impose his will as a blocker and as a runner after the catch. I mean, there's so many great aspects to his game that I almost find it impossible to believe that a team could misuse him that badly, and yet sure enough, Ole Miss managed to do it. I know that it's a leap of faith, and I know that whatever team takes him is going to have an element of trust in their coaches and play callers to tailor their offense to what he does best, but in my opinion, the potential rewards for doing that far exceed the risks. We're talking about one of the most talented overall receivers that we've seen come out of college in more than a decade. Bad 3-cone and shuttle times or not, there's a lot to work with here, and there's not a doubt in my mind that with the right coach, he could turn into one of the most dominant individual forces in the entire league. I have no idea where he's going to end up because he could realistically go as high as 3rd overall to the Jets and as low as 22nd overall to the Ravens, but as a message to his future team, no matter who it may be, remember the Patriots, remember Bill Belichick's philosophy, and embrace it as you develop Metcalf throughout his career. Don't focus on what he cannot do, focus on what he can do and build around that. If you're willing to be flexible, adaptable, and above all, creative, there's no limit to just how high this kid could go. And speaking of being flexible, adaptable, and creative, I want to thank our sponsor this week that helped make this episode possible, Wix. Ironically, it just so happened that I've been kind of thinking about building a website lately because the channel's starting to get bigger and it's starting to look like this is going to be a actual legitimate career option for me. So I wanted to build a site that I could put on business cards and use as a merch store and host a vlog and just kind of handle all the business side of the channel. And conveniently at that time, Wix approached me for a sponsorship. So I said, hell yeah, set me up with an account. I can poke around for a week, try to figure out how to use it. And to my surprise, building a homepage only took like an hour. It was way easier than I thought it would be. And it looked way better than I thought I could do on my own, especially because I have pretty much zero web design or design experience, period. But it looked awesome. It was a perfect web page to show what my channel is all about. And as my business continues to grow, I can build out the merch store in the site. I can host the vlog and podcasts and do booking and email marketing and everything that I eventually plan on doing for this channel all on Wix as one platform. So honestly, I'm a little bit mad at myself that I didn't do it a long time ago because I was being really lazy, but at least I have it now so I can use it to help grow myself from here on out. If you guys have also been thinking about building any kind of website for yourself, whether it's for your own business or for a portfolio, or maybe even as just part of a job resume, because I know that's a big thing these days too, check out Wix at the link in the description below, and it's also on the screen as well. Getting started is completely free, and I cannot recommend trying it out enough. It makes everything way easier, and you're gonna love it. As for me, I will of course be back next week, or potentially even again this week, with another full film room episode, and I think it's finally time to start digging into these quarterbacks. of course referring to Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins, so the next 2 shows will be on them, and naturally I expect them to be rather long, as most quarterback-centric episodes are, so hopefully you guys like those, and I'll be back soon. Until then, later!